Hello everyone, this is Phil Tingley, day 57, Entre 90-day video challenge. Um, so today, I think I've probably talked about this once before, but now that I've had the phone for a good month, um, back in March I finally switched out my old Samsung Note 8 that I had for about 4.5 years. Initially it was a Samsung S22, but I didn't want to pay full price. The Google promo at the time was port over a number, and I basically got the phone for half price, about $400. That didn't work out. Couldn't port over the number, which was my Google Workspace phone number through Google Voice I'd set up. Unfortunately, I didn't see at that time that yes, I did see that you could port over a Google Voice number as long as it's a personal phone number, not a workplace phone number. I couldn't find a way to allow the workplace phone number to be ported over to Google Fi, so I gave up on that. And plus, the other pain point on that mainly was that, and this is another issue, which I might get to in this video, and I think I got to before anyway. The Samsung S22, the one I ended up with, there's 3 different versions of S22, and then there's 3 different variations of the version that you can get. So I'm not sure if just the basic S22 that I ordered only comes in one flavor or not, but there's different versions of that for dual SIM capability. One, either you have just a single SIM, which I've been fine with for a long time, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted to have dual SIM so I could have my Phil Tingley business phone number and then keep my personal phone number and have them separate. And then the second version was one physical SIM, one eSIM, and the third version was to have 2 physical SIMs. I was hoping to get the 2 physical SIMs because it looked like there was very little chance of getting an eSIM for Android. I received the one physical SIM, one eSIM capability, and Mint Mobile, which is currently my personal data provider, which used to be T-Mobile, switched over to Mint, saved me about nearly 50% in yearly phone bill costs. Doesn't provide eSIM capability for Samsung, only for iPhone, which looks like most of the cellular providers in the US provide eSIM for iPhone, but not Android. It's totally ridiculous. I want to beat people to death for that, figuratively. The rest of the world, it looks like you can do eSIM for Android because most of the world does Android. Not so much in the iPhone. It's only in the US where we're predominantly iPhone for whatever stupid ass reason. That's part of what my video is for today. And but Android, for whatever reason, people crap on, they shit on in the US, and it irritates me. But anyway, so couldn't do eSIM on the Samsung, even though it's capable. eSIM's been around for years. There's no reason why we shouldn't have eSIM on Android. Especially Samsung is one of the biggest phone manufacturers in the world. I was like, what the hell is the goddamn problem? So that irritated me beyond belief. So a fantastic phone that I could have had, ended up returning for that reason. And so I ended up getting a Google 5A. Would have liked the Google Pixel 6A or the 6, excuse me. They added A's to the 4 series and the 5 series, but 6 is just 6 and 6 Plus and 6 Pro or something like that. Would have liked the Google Pixel 6, but a little bit out of the price range I wanted to pay. I wanted to stay under $400. Ended up with a 5A, got a fantastic deal, even better than the S22. I think I'd end up paying around $200. I covered this in a previous video some time back. A little over $200. I'd end up paying for it and get a free phone upgrade at the end of 2 years. However, I've been a little bit pissy with my 5A since then. Yes, it does have 5G service. Yes, at home on Wi-Fi, it connects almost flawlessly. All right. My Note 8 that I had like 4.5 years, it did tend to have more issues with the Wi-Fi network for whatever reason, but cellular service was out fucking standing. All right. The 5A 5G, nearly flawless, out fucking standing. Excuse my French. I'm married to a French woman. Wi-Fi service works fantastic. All right. I don't seem to have any problem there. When I get out in cellular service, and even with my wife, she has a 4A, which I bought like 2 years ago. She has cellular service. I'm not sure if that's because of Mint or just because of the phone. Since I'm having problems with the 5A, I want to say it's more of a Pixel series phone issue with the cellular service. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. But my 5A, it runs on 5G. Of course, it can do 4G as well, LTE service. It just has stupid connection problems, and it pisses me off. Earlier this week on Wednesday, I have a group call with my affiliate group, people that I worked with without the mentor anymore. We continued on. We had a short hiatus, and then we continued on with our group calls. So I had the group call on Wednesday, 10 a.m. Pacific time. I had to be at work. Wanted to go into work early. Had to do some extra stuff, or be in work early so I could take care of things anyway. And my call dropped like multiple times. At least a good 8 times. And during those times, I had 5G service. I'm like, why is the Zoom call dropping when I have 5G service? Even crappy 5G service should be better than 4G. All right, theoretically. And it was also really idiotic when I got to the airport building I was going to. I work for UPS. Outside the building, 5G service, but I dropped the call like 3 times. Went into the building, reestablished the call, and it stayed strong inside the building. Now, 5G inside the building should be a lot weaker than outside the building because of the nature of the bandwidth of 5G, higher bandwidth, obviously, but it's a higher frequency. Higher frequency you go, the less penetration it has. It should not be penetrating the concrete that surrounds the building that I'm working at. And yet, I had better reception, and it worked better inside the building than outside the building. We don't have a cell booster within that building, so that didn't make any sense to me. I just think it was just random luck. Slightly closer to the airport main structure, possibly, but seriously, I don't think that would be it either, because that facility's kind of off a runway, so the 5G signal doesn't transmit that far. It's more, you're definitely limited within 150 feet. And I'm definitely more than 150 feet away from a 5G tower inside the building. So anyway, digress from there. So left the building shortly thereafter. Drove around the perimeter of the airport. Probably a good mile, and along that path, stopped. Signal stopped, dropped several more times. Totally irritating. And that's not the only case I've run into problems with the Google Pixel 5a. Applications lock up, freeze at the reboot. I use Scribed, it's similar to Audible, and it'll load up fine, and then I'll navigate away from that, come back to it, and it'll cycle through, hourglass type symbol if you're used to that on Windows, trying to connect. Even though I show solid 5G connection, it can't connect. I have to exit out, and even on the way home tonight, try playing an audiobook. I exited the Scribe application, restarted a good 3 or 4 different times, still cycling through, can't connect to the audio, can't connect, even though I had a strong, solid 5G connection. And it has worked before along the same stretch of road. I drive the same stretch of highway on the way back home after work every single night. So didn't make any sense. After a month, I'm sorely disappointed in my Pixel 5a. I can't wait to move back to a Samsung phone. Seriously. So more or less what I was getting to. I don't know, 11 minutes already wasted on that. Kind of going into my whole computer tech realm of my life. I'm an IT person basically at heart. I started off, my first computer was Commodore 64 that I got from my father. And that was like one of the greatest things since apple pie. I had a little bit of computer experience before that in school, but the Commodore 64 was fantastic. I could program it myself. Unfortunately, I was running on a cassette tape deck. So for you old timers, you know what that is. Anybody millennial age would probably go, tape deck, what are you talking about? So cassette tape deck is where I stored my programs, loaded programs from. And this was like back in late 84, 85 when I had this Commodore 64. And graphic wise, if you took the time, graphic wise, it was more powerful than the IBM XT that I ended up when I lived with my mom and her new husband later on in like 1987, 88. Graphic wise, it was more powerful than that PC. Some 3 years later, 3 to 4 years later. And I'm talking about retail type games, not things you could program yourself. Programming wise, yourself, yes, if you took the time, you could do the peeks and pokes and make a spectacular game back in the day on a Commodore 64. But retail game wise, nearly 4 years later, the same game that I had been playing on an IBM or the Commodore 64, Pirates, looked way better on the Commodore 64 than it did on the IBM XT nearly 4 years later. So that's just to state the power of the Commodore 64 at the time. Definitely is meaningless nowadays. But that's where I started at, personal computer wise, Commodore 64. In school, all the schools, Apple, whatever they were doing, basically infiltrated all the school systems, or at least the ones I went to. They all had Apple computers pretty much in them. So I grew up with Apple IIe's, 2C's, a little bit of 2GS. 2GS kind of sucked big time. They tried to be an IBM computer, and they did a poor-ass job at it. It was a worthless piece of crap overall. The 2E, 2C were rock solid, fantastic systems, awesome things to work on. At the time when I was in San Diego with my mom and her husband, they had an IBM XT system, which at the time you had to boot up to DOS in order to use the system. So if you didn't have a DOS disk, 5.25-inch floppy disk, for those that are laughing and snickering, like, yeah, 5.25-inch floppy, woohoo! You had to boot with that in order to use the system. So I didn't really get into it that much. The Apple IIe, was already programmed in, and made it much easier to use. I had, even though I didn't have an Apple computer, I don't remember the exact number, but a good 50 to 70 5.25 inch floppies. And with the 2C, they had the 3.5 inch. The 2E was 5.25 inch. The 2C, the major difference on there was a 3.5 inch floppy. Major difference was 5.25 inch, bigger, flimsier. But I think one-sided was like 170K, something like that. I think total was 360K if I remember right. It's been a really long time since I thought about that, but I believe the single dual-sided dual layer or something like that was like 360K on the 5.25 inch floppy, and with the 3.5 inch, you could only do one-sided. Technically, you'd only plug it in one way. 5.25 inch floppy. Yeah, or now I remember. You could buy the single-sided kind, and then basically to make it a double-sided, there was a little notch that was clipped out on one side. So if you just did the same notch on the opposite side, you flip the disc over and stick it in, and generally, if you had decent quality 5.25 inch floppy discs, both sides work perfectly fine. All you had to do was make the notch on the opposite side, stick it, flip it over, stick it in, and you could use the opposite side, so you could double the capacity. If you had lower end floppy disk, because you didn't have a lot of money, and I'm talking about crap that cost like 10 cents at the time, probably. The backside wasn't as properly, or wasn't prepared as well, and so it would be a crapshoot if it worked or not. If you had decent quality, and the name that springs to mind is Verbatim. Verbatim and I think 3M were the major producers for floppy disks at the time. If you had their disks, both sides worked fairly well. Once in a while, you'd run into some problems, but most of the time, if you bought a 10-pack of floppy disks, 5.25 inch, you could use both sides. If you bought the single-sided version, just cut out that little notch, and there you go, double-sided disc. 3.5 worked differently. It was a hard shell case, and it still used a notch, but it was a built-in notch with a little slider and all that crap. It made it a little bit more complicated. Sure, we really dug into it. I probably could have done it as well, but the beauty of the 3.5 inch disc is that it was like twice the size of a dual-sided 5.25 inch floppy. So, if I remember correctly, the max you could get on a 5.25 inch dual-sided was like 360. With a 3.5 inch, you basically started at 720, and then they had the high-density version, which was 1.44 megabyte, which was fantastic. You could store so much information on there. Think of it as equivalent like carrying around like a terabyte drive, external drive nowadays. So I had, a good 50 to 70 5.25 inch discs, and then, since the school also had 2Cs, and the university I was going in, I would visit in San Marcos. They had a mixture, I think they had a mixture of both 2Es and 2Cs, if I remember right. So I had a good, probably 40, 50, 3.5 inch discs as well. Didn't need to have as many because they stored a lot more data on them. And I think it was at least one-third of the applications I had, or disk space I had on these floppies, were hacking and cracking programs, right? So I'd go into usually the university, because they'd have disks there, and different games, applications, programs, and things that you could use, because that wasn't built into the computer back then. For you millennials, a basic computer like a IBM XT system. Actually, I think this was before XT actually came out. Commodore 64s, the Apple IIe's, Apple IIc's. There was no internet yet, So there wasn't just going out to download programs. You had to bring a program along with you via a floppy disk to install or to run. There was no, I'm sure there were some people that had a hard drive, technically, but there wasn't a built-in hard drive on these computers where you would store your data, your computer systems, permanently. All right, the 2E and the Apple II series was a little bit more unique compared to whatever IBM had at the time, because IBM, you had to boot up to a floppy disk or to a disk to have an operating system. The Apple IIs incorporated the operating system into the system itself, so it was on a ROM or ROM chip within the Apple II. And yeah, you can tell I'm a geek, technophobe, right? Or not technophobe, technophile. And that was one of the main allures of the Apple series at the time. The OS was already built in, so you just had to provide the disk with the application you wanted to run, and you would just run the application from the disk. But any data you needed to save, you also needed to save the disk. So most of the time you would run the application, would load into memory, then you could pull it out and plug in a data disk in order to save your spreadsheets, your documents for your word processing documents, so on and so forth. If you're really advanced and had plenty of money, you could have dual disk drives. The Commodore 64 I had when I was in like 7th grade, this was like in 1985. I didn't have a disk drive. I had a cassette tape drive. That was the basic setup for a Commodore 64 with a cassette tape drive. If you had more money, then you could buy the big, huge 5.25-inch floppy disk drive. And I want to say it was 5.25-inch. There was also an 8-inch. I didn't have one personally. I know there was an 8-inch floppy disk drive, which held even less data than the 5.25-inch, believe it or not. But put in perspective, the Commodore 64 was basically a computer that was within a keyboard. So if you look at your normal keyboards today, they're nice and thin. They're pretty much all the standard length and depth, right? Or width. We'll call the depth from the desk up. All right, the width from front to back, the width from front to back, the length from left to right. All right, so most keyboards are pretty much the same size, unless you get some special keyboards that don't have the 10 key on the side, blah, blah, blah. So the Commodore 64 was about that length and width, slightly bigger because manufacturing process, bezel size. But the depth was much bigger. I want to say it was around 1.5 to 2 inches, somewhere in there, because that's where the actual computer resided. That was within the keyboard itself. There was no tower. That was one of the great things about the Commodore 64, the TRS-80, called the Trash 80, or nicknamed the Trash 80, and other systems like that. Most of them incorporated a keyboard, which would be similar to keyboards nowadays, bigger in size because of the frame around it, more than likely, or most of them anyway. Lenovo tries to challenge that. But they would all have like a separate CPU box, a tower, mid-tower, mini-tower, full tower, whatever you want to call it. A separate box where your computer actually resided at. The keyboard would attach to it via cable. Commodore 64 changed that to where it was all contained within the keyboard box and connected to your television. Made it very convenient. It was fantastic. Loved it at the time. Unfortunately, I beat it to death because one of the programs I was trying to program in, it didn't like my syntax, even though I could find nothing wrong with it. Bam, bam, bam. Commodore 64 dead. So all the computers since then, I think there was one other computer that did something similar, but as far as I know, all of the computers since then have basically been set up like we know, besides laptops or tablets. Keyboard is an accessory that you plug into the computer. So anyway, I forgot where I was going. Apple II, loved it. Had lots of programs for it, lots of disks for it, even though I didn't own one. Eventually, I migrated into the IBM series, MS-DOS, and when I went over to Korea in 91, I think it was, 91, when I went over to Korea, right at the end of 91, early 92, ended up buying me a 360 X40, and I've been stuck with Windows computers ever since. So that leapfrogs into the phone, because in a way, Apple, of course, owned the Apple IIc, 2G, 2E, and later into the Mac OS, which I also had dealt with, which I thought was pretty good. That had, unlike the Apple II series that had the OS built into it, it was more of a GUI. So think of early version of Windows, basically, because Windows theoretically or technically stole the GUI concept from Apple Mac. But so Apple owned Mac, ended up creating iPhone. Now the iPhone and Android are actually related. If you didn't know, this is going to be a really long video. I'm already hitting 26 and a half minutes. So there once upon a time was, and still is, I don't know if it's actually in use anymore. Probably isn't some certain systems that exist still. An operating system owned by AT&T, developed, created. Can't remember if they actually created it or not, but anyway, they developed, owned it. It's a proprietary operating system owned by AT&T called Unix. Unix had two branch-off versions of it. One, think of it as a free side, and the other one as a paid-for side. The paid-for side didn't have very many variations from it. There was a couple of them, I'm not going to go into all of them, but eventually one of them ended up becoming Apple iOS, which you currently run on your Apple Macs, your iPhones. It has a variation of it. They all run on this Unix version, or Unix-derived version of that's called iOS. It's paid for, it's proprietary, they own it, you can't change it. You're not even allowed to look at it. It's owned by Apple, only they can do whatever they want to it. Point of the story is, I'm not an iPhone user because I don't believe in being locked down by the operating system. I think that should be open and free. You should be able to change it, make it do what you want to do if you have the time, inkling, resources, the know-how, and whatnot. Or at least, if someone else has that ability to do it, you should have the ability to be able to choose that version of the OS, that flavor of the OS, to use it as you want if you happen to like what they produced. So that's why Apple iPhones are the only ones that run iOS. No one else can run iOS. No one else will run iOS. And in a way, that's good in some capacities because they own everything on it. They can make sure everything works perfectly before they release it, or at least, they're in charge of everything, right? If you don't conform to exactly how they want things done, you don't have access to their platform, in essence. However, that I almost want to say that the iOS and the Apple structure makes me want to equate it to communism, which is funny because Apple, where do they have their phones mainly built? China. So, not begrudging people who have an iPhone and use iPhone and love iPhone, but most of the world outside of the U.S. doesn't use iPhone. Most of the world uses Android. It's only in the US where everything is iPhone. And where I'm getting at to this is what drove me into getting a Pixel 5a. Because my 5a has a built-in physical SIM and an eSIM. As I was getting to earlier, Mint, my personal cell phone provider, doesn't provide service for eSIM unless you have an iPhone. And from what I could find, at least several months ago, none of the other providers in the US provide service for eSIM on any phones unless if you have an iPhone, except for Google Fi, which will provide eSIM for iPhone and for Google Pixel phones, not for any other Android phone. Even though a Pixel phone is an Android phone, of course, because that was developed by Google or Alphabet, and all the other Android phones are a derivative of Android. All right, they're all Android operating systems, just their particular flavor. That's where I was getting at with the iPhone series. They have their version is locked down. However, Android, which is based off of Linux, which is a derivative of Unix, but it's the free version, the open source version. You can take Linux, change it, modify it, make it do whatever you want, and republish it under your version. That's why there's tons of different versions of Linux out there. Android is built off of Linux. Android is open source. So if you're into Android, if you ever look into it, your phone, if you root it out and do what's necessary on it, if you don't like the stock version or the version of Android that you get from your particular phone carrier or phone manufacturer, hence a Google Pixel phone, even though it may be running the same OS Android version on the Pixel as compared to a Samsung phone, they are different because Samsung is allowed to add, change, modify the Android OS for their phone as they see fit. So it's the same OS, underlying structure. However, each developer can change it however they want. So there are people out there that take the source code and modify it, strip out things that are useless, strip out all the bloatware, make modifications to it, and republish it. The only thing is with an Android phone, you have to root your phone, you have to go through a few different processes, and nowadays some of the systems actually, they already have it. Some of the phone systems or phone providers already set it up to where you can do that easily without having to go through all the extra steps. However, usually you have to install some additional apps. You have to download the program, the packages and things like that, store it on the phone, and do certain functions in order to get it to that particular flavor of Android OS. So that's what I like about Android OS. Not that I've done it myself, but I like having the option there. I've done it to a few of my Android phones in the past. And, you can make your phone, as long as you don't mind changing things and losing everything that you currently have installed, back up your data, of course, your critical data, important information that you need, all applications, things you have to reinstall. But on Android phones, you can wipe it, reset it, reload it with a whole different version of Android than what you had previously. Apple phones, you can't do that. So that's what I like about Android. That's why I stick with Android. I forget what did I originally start with? Who knows? I've been going on for 34 minutes. 34 minutes now. This is my longest video yet. And you start getting me talking about tech stuff, IT stuff. I may not stop. So anyway, long story short, if you're going to go with the Pixel phone, don't go with the 5A. It's irritated me and the last month was several different things, mostly connection issues with cellular side. I am guessing that if you are using, and I want to say that's kind of like with the iPhone issues that were discovered years ago, that they constantly made the older iPhone phones, the older iPhone phones, yeah, that was right, slower as you upgraded. They kind of force you into buying a newer iPhone. That I think Google's kind of doing the similar thing. If you have a Pixel and you're not using the Fi service, that your cellular connection screws up more often than it should. Cellular service, you're always going to run into issues here and there, blackouts, dead zones, switching from one cell tower to another, blah, 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 blah. That's going to happen. All right. But it seems like I've lived in the same place for the last couple of years. I was on T-Mobile for, many years. So in the house I lived at, where I work at, go the same path, running the same areas. When I was on T-Mobile, I rarely had any issues with my Samsung phone with cellular connection. I had more issues with Wi-Fi connection actually on my Note 8. With the Pixel 5a, it's like the complete opposite. I'm driving the same areas, live in the same house. Mint, which I switched over to when I was on my Samsung, worked just like the T-Mobile service did. When I switched over to my Pixel 5a, started having problems with the cellular service. Same areas, same phone number, same SIM chip, but started having problems. So I want to say that it's the Pixel phone itself, and that there's, don't want to say conspiracy theory, but it just seems like to me that there's something within the Pixel, because even my wife has problems with her 4A with cellular service outside the house, data service anyway, not phone calls, where it just doesn't work. And I can switch from the Mint service with Mint. There's another thing I was talking about in my head. Let's make this video even longer. So Mint basically uses T-Mobile network to communicate with. You can think of Mint and T-Mobile as two different Wi-Fi services with the same underlying network connection, just like if you were at home and you had a friend next, your neighbor, friendly with your neighbor next door, you're both using the same network connection. My example, in Las Vegas, we use Cox Cable as one of the primary providers. You both have Cox Cable for your internet connection. However, your Wi-Fi is named X, their Wi-Fi is named Y. Y does not communicate with X, X does not communicate with Y, but it's the same underlying internet connection because you're both using Cox Cable. So with T-Mobile and Mint, T-Mobile is also the underlying internet connection because they actually own backbone into the internet itself. But T-Mobile provides its own cellular connectivity under their name. They sublet their network connectivity to T-Mobile, and so T-Mobile to Mint. So Mint has its own Wi-Fi connection, so to speak, cellular connection into the T-Mobile network, where a T-Mobile user can't use Mint, but under this unique way, Mint, since Mint is using T-Mobile, you also have the option to switch back over to T-Mobile networks in order to use T-Mobile data, because that's what Mint is using as T-Mobile. So, at least with my wife's phone, when she has a problem with data connectivity to Mint, tell her, okay, go into your cellular connection setup on her 4A, select the Mint Mobile, and go down, scroll all the way down to APN. Think of APN as Wi-Fi or SSID for the Wi-Fi network. APN, switch it from Mint or wholesale, as it used to be called, to T-Mobile, and then you just have data, which usually works. Where was I going with this? Basically, that my 5A doesn't matter if I have it on Mint or T-Mobile. Still, cellular seems to screw up, and so therefore I think that it's Google and their programming algorithms that they put within the Pixel series. That if you're not on Google Fi, which is their cellular network, then cause problems with your cellular connection. They don't seem to mess with the Wi-Fi network, which seems to be much more solid than what I had with the Note 8. And I had Note 4 before that, right? I think it was Note 4. So Note 4, not as many Wi-Fi problems, but the Note 8 definitely had some Wi-Fi issues. Cellular was much stronger. So beware of the Google Pixel 5a. Don't recommend that one. The Google 6 Pixel or Pixel 6, that does have a different CPU chipset. They are no longer using Qualcomm Snapdragon. Google developed their own CPU. Not sure how that works. Still going to run the same OS and junk like that. So if they are doing something like that, or if you're not using Google Fi, your reliability for cellular may be lower or not as good as it should be. If they are doing something like that, then it doesn't matter if you're on a 5A or a 6. It's probably gonna do the same thing. So I can't wait to get back to my Samsung series of phones. Hopefully, if things go well, it'll be later this year. I'll get me back to a S22, even if I gotta pay full price. If not, it'll be next year. Probably when the S23 comes out. Probably won't buy the S23 because it'll be too expensive. So I'll probably be able to get a decent deal on the S22 and switch back to an S22 at that point. Hopefully Ultra. So the S22 Ultra is basically going to be replacing the Samsung Note series, since they both have a stylus built in. From what I've been seeing, at least so far, I haven't heard any plans for a Note being released this year, but I haven't checked in a few months. So those of you who are Note users see Note either just this being the last year, if they still still create a new Note series, or it's gone. The S22 Ultra and future versions of S series Ultra series at least, would be taking over the Note realm, where you have the stylus. That's a pen built into the phone that you can pop out and use it to write and draw on the screen with. And the S22 series has 3 different versions: the S22, S22 Plus. It's a bigger screen, a little bit more RAM, and the S22 Ultra, a little bit bigger still, and has the stylus. All right, so I've taken up 43 minutes of your time. If you listen this long, you are strong. Keep strong, Jedi or Sith. I do correlate with Darth Vader, so either one is fine with me. Keep strong. Love you all. Thank you for listening. If you dropped out earlier, well, you won't hear this part anyway, but you're still fine. And keep feeling tingly. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.